Today, we're going to be reading just a few random excerpts from Fungipedia by Lawrence Millman. Fairy rings. Once thought to have been created by the nocturnal frolicking of fairies, lightning strikes, love-crazed hedgehogs, dances of witches on Walpurgis night, and recently, UFO landings. Fairy rings are actually caused by an outward growing mycelium of fungus that depletes the soil of its nutrients, thus creating what is called the necrotic zone in the center. When the mycelium has acquired enough nutrients, it creates a ring of mushrooms. Depending on the conditions, a fairy ring can grow a few inches or a few feet each year. Fairy rings can be quite vulnerable. Purple-spored puffballs can form fairy rings that survive for 400 years or more. One particularly large fairy ring near Stonehenge in southern England is estimated to be at least 1,000 years old. The best known of the 60 or so fairy ring species is that of the appropriately named fairy ring mushroom, or Marasmius aureus, which aids and abets the necrotic process by releasing prussic acid, a slayer of grasses. Fairies themselves were doubtless never capable of such obnoxious behavior. Other fungi that create a ring-like shape are the species responsible for the skin infection known as ringworm, a condition that has no connection to the frolicking of fairies. Mycelium. A collection of repeatedly branching hyphae that might be described as the workhorse of a fungus. All macrofungi and almost all microfungi possess this workhorse. Buried in its substrate, a mycelium draws on a variety of different enzymes to support its digestive needs, and when the time is appropriate, it creates one or more fruiting bodies. It puts a sizable portion of its biomass into these fruiting bodies, so a person who picks mushrooms promiscuously is incorrect in assuming that he or she is not damaging the mycelia of those mushrooms. Called Nature's Internet by Paul Stamets, a mycelium can spread over large distances, advancing and retreating by responding to environmental cues. A hand of healthy soil can contain several hundred miles of mycelia. Since a mycelium is only a single cell wide, it's invisible to the naked eye and will remain invisible unless it decides to bundle itself into rhizomorphs. Like any animal or plant, a mycelium has one group of genes in its nuclei and a different group in the mitochondria of its cells. These genes can be highly competitive against another mycelium that happens to be in the same substrate, releasing chemicals that say, in effect, "Blow off, you bugger!" More often than not, the bugger in question does not blow off. Yeasts. Single-celled fungi in approximately 100 genera that reproduce by either budding or fission, which is the splitting of cells. Almost all yeasts are invisible to the naked eye. They were probably the first organisms observed by Anton van Leeuwenhoek after he invented the compound microscope. Geneticists love yeasts since they're quite easy to grow in the laboratory. Brewers also love yeasts since they can use them to make alcohol, which they've done so for at least 8,000 years. Baker's yeast has been used to make bread for almost as long. It gobbles up the sugars in bread dough and then burps out a bubble of CO2, or carbon dioxide, forcing the dough to rise. The ancient Egyptians believed the god Osiris gave humans yeasts to upgrade their lives. If humans love yeasts, yeasts love humans too. An inhabitant of our so-called mycobiome, note, bacteria inhabit our microbiome. The yeast Trichosporon incen grows on our pubic hairs, eyelashes, and eyebrows. Candida albicans is an opportunistic yeast that causes infections in our mouths, colons, and reproductive organs. A recently discovered yeast, Candida auris, can often be lethal since it's resistant to antifungal drugs. A number of yeasts live in the soil and dry lakes of Antarctica, thus reminding us of the seemingly endless adaptability of fungi. Zombie ants. Ants infected by an Ophiocordyceps species, often Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, whose mycelium controls the ants like a puppet master controls his puppets. The fungus, an ascomycete, is so knowledgeable about ant taxonomy that it releases different chemicals to control different ant species. These chemicals act on the ant's neural networks. Upon being infected, an ant sways back and forth like a zombie and then begins crawling up a nearby tree, where it fastens its mandibles on a leaf or a branch. The time between initial infection and the creation of the fruiting body is somewhere between 4 and 10 days. The ant typically clamps onto the north side of the tree at a height of at least 11 inches above the ground. It also does so when the temperature is between 68 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and when the time is almost exactly 12 o'clock noon. Such remarkable specificity would seem to be ideal for dropping spores on the ant trails immediately below the fungus's fruiting body, and causing the zombification process to repeat itself. With enzymes that eat through their host's cuticle, Ophiocordyceps species also attack grasshoppers, spiders, beetles, locusts, transforming their rear ends into a spore mass, and many other arthropods. As with ants, they affect their host's muscles, but seemingly leave its brain intact, which means the host remains conscious of its doomed state. I know that one was a little weird, but Fungipedia.